Only Christ was blameless, right? So why does Paul tell us in Philippians 2 to act in a way that you may be blameless? What's it mean to be blameless before God? Welcome to Looking Intently. My name's Steve, and I put out 3 short videos on the Bible each week. You can subscribe with the link in the lower right, and be sure and click that bell icon when it comes up. And then if you want to catch up on the series we're in on the book of Philippians, you can click on the card here in the upper right. Well, it's hard enough, isn't it, to learn the meaning of one meaning of some Bible words. Do you know what propitiation means? Yeah. But it's even harder when some words in the Bible have 2 meanings. And not just harder in the sense of confusing, it can be harder on me if I don't understand what it's talking about, and I think God's asking me to do something that's impossible. It can make me really feel hopeless. God, there's no way I can do what it seems you're calling me to. Well, there's an example of that in Philippians chapter 2. Starting at verse 14, Paul says, "Do all things without grumbling or disputing, that you may be blameless and innocent, children of God without blemish in the midst of a crooked and twisted generation, among whom you shine as lights in the world." Well, it says there, be blameless and innocent. I can't be blameless before God. That's why I need God's grace. And then it talks about do this, do all things without grumbling or disputing so that I can be blameless. Well, that's my works making me blameless. How's that fit with grace? Well, words like blameless and innocent and pure and even holy have 2 different meanings, and they're related to another common Bible word or words, righteous and righteousness. Have you ever noticed in the Bible that sometimes when it speaks of the righteous, as in Romans 3:10, it says none is righteous, no, not one. But then in other verses, 1 Peter 3:12, for example, it says, "For the eyes of the Lord are on the righteous." Well, who's he looking at? It just said there aren't any. How do we understand that? How do we harmonize those? Well, the answer lies in the fact that there are 2 types of righteousness. There is absolute righteousness, which is our righteousness compared to God's. And we're either absolutely righteous or absolutely not. Again, the comparison is to God and His righteousness. Another word for this is declared righteousness, because God declares us righteous when we accept Christ's penalty for our sin. And then the other type of righteousness is our relative righteousness. That's my righteousness relative to someone else's, compared to someone else's, not God. And you see this often in the Psalms, the righteous versus the wicked. The one group is righteous compared to the wicked. They're trying to live for God. And another word for that one is our personal righteousness. It's what I do or don't do determines that level of my relative righteousness. Well, all right, as I'm reading through the Bible, how do I know which one it's talking about? And the key to that is the context. What's it say around it? And we see this in this passage here in Philippians. "Do all things without grumbling or disputing, that you may be blameless and innocent, children of God without blemish in the midst of a crooked and twisted generation, among whom you shine as lights in the world." So there's clues there to both of those elements of the relative personal righteousness. First of all, it says do something to be blameless and innocent. Well, that's the personal side. I do it. It's based on my works. And then the relative side, notice how it's contrasted with the world and this crooked and twisted generation. Compared to them, we as Christians are righteous and we stand out. So just to be clear on this important subject, our forgiveness and eventually spending eternity in heaven, that's based on our absolute declared righteousness, and we receive that through faith. Our transformation, though, and specifically our level, where am I in my level of spiritual maturity, becoming more and more like Christ? Well, that's based on our personal relative righteousness, and even that's related to faith. It's lived by faith. God's principles, it says to do this or not do this. Well, there's times where that's tough. It looks like that's going to be, not a good idea, but I trust God. It's the best thing to do. And so I live it out. And I become more and more relatively righteous. Have you ever been confused by the 2 of those? Read a passage and it seemed like God was asking you to be perfect, in that sense? If so, put it in the comments below. I'd love to hear about it. I'm going to put a link in the description to a sermon I did a while ago that goes into even more depth on this subject of righteousness. As always, I want to remind you, read the good book like a good book.